I woke to snow in my throat and a title I didn't want. Zhou, CEO, villain, antagonist to be smothered by fate. The world smelled like metal and pine, like a hospital in winter. My memories were a map of two lives. One, a late-night Reddit scroller with too many what-ifs. The other, corporate dossiers, private jets, the bite of a villain's tailored collar. I remembered the original novel's plot beat by beat, especially the one where my adopted brother, Jian, turned knife and family turned graves. The future was a story with spoilers stamped on my brain. Cold apocalypse meant cities frozen, supplies rationed, networks down. The company I led had been a fortress until supply chains collapsed. My family, mother by adoption, Mrs. Lee, who made the best steamed buns and the worst poker face, and little sister May, who thought survival boots were a valid form of fashion, slept 2 rooms away. I could have followed the script. I could have let Giant's smile be the last thing my mother saw. But we live in a different era of villain origin stories. Now the protagonist knows the script, and knowing is a very bad thing for the people who meant to follow it. I made coffee in a thermos, tasted irony and burnt beans, and wrote one rule on a sticky note that I stuck to the mirror. Spoilers are weapons. If the author thought they could reuse me as a stepping stone for the real lead, they'd never met me, Ethan, self-appointed plot exit strategist. The first move was inventory. Not spreadsheets, human inventories. Who loved us, who used us, and who had knives in pockets sewn for later. The apocalypse had a strange effect. Greed and character peeled away at the same speed as frostbite. The board of my company had already collapsed into factions, hoarders, prophets, everything is a sign, and the quiet investors who still counted their money as if it might multiply. Giant wore pity like a crown. He played the dutiful adopted son so well that even I had to admire the craftsmanship. He brought my mother wood for the stove and walked May to the training yard. He told me, with a sincerity that might have been carved, that we should be careful wolves in a new world, he said. It was the kind of line that in the book preceded a betrayal. In this version, I paid attention to diction and footwork. I rerouted the company's remaining supplies to a satellite storehouse I had converted into a bunker. Canned food, water purifiers, a ridiculous number of thermal blankets, and something childish and crucial, board games. If you survive without boredom, you survive with your wits. I tested the water by staging a small, controlled crisis, a simulated meltdown in a peripheral depot. The goal: observe who panicked, who lied, who ran. Giant ran toward the depot, not away. That was the first red flag. The second was that his hands were clean when he returned. Clean hands are a luxury in a world of soot and scavenged gloves. I also made a friend, an ex-field engineer named Leela who could make a radio out of a tin can and 3 wishes. She had a laugh like a broken bell and no patience for theatrical villains. Leela became my co-conspirator. We began nudging the timeline, small, plausible changes that would ripple. Swap a guard, delay a convoy, swap a finger on a manifest. Each tiny change felt like cheating a book, but it was working. Narratives are brittle, nudges break them. Plotting revenge in an apocalypse is equal parts tactics and therapy. May trained with a focus that made my chest ache. She could silence a room with one look and could fashion a survival glove from duct tape and stubbornness. Mrs. Lee kept the family's morale with soup and old stories about our ancestors outwitting bandits. I taught them one lesson I wished I'd learned sooner: to look for exits, not endings. We shifted our public persona. The villain CEO went from monolithic to accessible. I began doing small acts of genuine generosity around the frozen district. Share rations with a scavenger crew, repair a neighbor's roof, because nothing defangs a plot like mirror image behavior. People who expected me to be cruel were thrown off when I opened the warm bunker door and actually let them in. Secrets are currency in a collapsed world. I took mine to the ledger. The truth was that Giant's loyalty had been bought once, not by money but by a promise made when he was too young to read the fine print. Power, influence, a place at a table that would never be his without a hand from our enemies. Someone higher up, A shadowed old benefactor from the old novel had whispered into his ear. I had to find who was whispering. Surveillance in a winter wasteland is improvisation. Leela rewired a network of scavenged cameras, mostly baby monitors and flashlight lenses. I found exchanges, coded deliveries, late-night meetings at the ruined opera house, a man with a cane who smelled like amber and old threats. His name was Zhou, a director of the old state company, a whisper merchant. He planted ideas and Jian took them like a harvest. I tried warmth, and it almost burned us. I staged a reconciliation with Jian, complete with steam buns and a staged confession that made him swell with pride. He thought he had me again. He didn't. What he didn't expect was for me to press a simple question like a fork into a wound. Who promises a son a throne without telling the father? He laughed, he slipped, he called Zhou by habit. The mistake was small, human, and delicious. I trailed that voice to a meeting at dawn. There, in an abandoned township hall, I watched Zhou hand Jian a sealed envelope. Knowing the book, I knew the envelope contained a plan, how to remove the villain and seat the true heir. I also learned something dangerous. Jian believed Zhou would save him if he followed through. That belief was leverage. We could have taken Jian in like a feral dog and trained him, or we could make him the hero of his own story. I chose the latter with an invisible leash. I engineered a revelation, fake documents, a staged confession from Zhou, Leela is brilliant at voices, and a public forum where grievances could be aired. Jian would be exposed to the betrayal and offered a choice, sink into villainy or step away from it. At the forum, under a sky like a bruised coin, I told the truth as gently as one can tell a knife's owner. Someone promised you a crown, Jian, I said, but crowns forged by whispers fall apart under scrutiny. The crowd murmured. Jian's face turned a color I didn't have a name for. He fled, and that act, cowardice or shame, shifted the novel's momentum. Zhou didn't like losing pawns. He sent men in the night, not many, but enough to burn our perimeter and test our will. The first skirmish was messy, full of shouted names and splintered wood. May surprised me by improvising a tripline and a Molotov made from tea. She had a flair for the ironic. We defended the bunker, and in the afterglow, I saw something I hadn't planned on. The community rallied. People we'd fed, sheltered, and trusted returned the favor. Jian watched from the ridgeline, face hollow. I had a chance to call him down, to bargain for a truce, but the old script hummed in my head. I refused to be the man who asks for pity. Instead, I left a thermos of tea at the edge of the path. Small kindnesses become weapons too. People claim apocalypse and love don't mix. They do. I found her in a supply queue, Hana, a doctor with frostbitten knuckles and a stubborn grin. She was sarcastic about my villain label and unimpressed by my resume. We argued about the ethics of ration distribution, and I capitulated only because I liked her laugh. Our romance began with bartered medical supplies and lectures on wound care. She made me softer in ways that didn't ruin strategy. She taught May to stitch and taught me to listen. Hana didn't know the novel's plot. She only knew the present, a man who opened doors, who planned, who loved his family. She kept me anchored. Information is the last standing infrastructure. I blew a small hole in Gu's operation by exposing his ledger, receipts, favors, a chain of corruption. The ledger's release was a weaponized truth. Everyone who had quietly benefited from the old order felt the ground shift. Some turned on Gu, others turned on Jian for being his instrument. The city convulsed. In the chaos, I found a list of names that included people I thought beyond reproach. The board members who'd acquiesced to Gu, the ministers who had sold rations. I didn't want all their heads, I wanted accountability. The novel loved dramatic bloodletting. I loved slower, more dangerous things, rebuilding trust without blood on the cuffs. Plot twists are predictable when you expect them. The real wild card was empathy. When Jian returned to the bunker, hands empty and eyes raw, he didn't attack. He knelt and confessed, not with the rote lines of a villainous turn, but with fear about being used, about living under someone else's promises. He said quietly, that he'd planned the attack because he thought it would make us worthy of survival. He thought our suffering would make our family stronger in a twisted calculus. I could have struck him down. Instead, I offered him a task, help fix what he'd broken. He accepted, and then, in a small human misstep, he tried to make amends by taking a supply run alone. Zhou's men ambushed him. He didn't die, but he was changed. That near-death saved him from being a villain. It also offered me an opening. With Zhou's ledger public and Giant at my side, we confronted Zhou at the derelict factory where he'd once handed out promises like candy. He expected fury. He got something colder, a legal file, assembly votes, testimonies. We didn't lynch him. We extracted testimony, forced him to sign reparations, forced his cronies to resign. The old benefactor's empire collapsed not under blood but under evidence. Justice in the new world had to be tangible. Later, Zhou tried to escape. May and Leela cornered him, May with a rifle she couldn't help looking proud of, Leela with a wrench and a grin. Zhou planted his face in the snow, and I offered him a choice: confess publicly or disappear into the blizzard. He chose confession. The crowd listened. They chose accountability. We rewrote governance. The company became a cooperative. Rations were redistributed based on need and contribution. People who had followed the old fortunes found themselves useful in new ways. Giant worked the supply lines. His hands grew steady. Mrs. Lee opened a communal kitchen. May ran security with a rule book that made even hardened scavengers chuckle. No stealing of neighbors' socks unless traded for cookies. Hana and I taught basic first aid. Leela opened a repair shop. We learned that rebuilding is plodding work, less cinematic than single-handedly toppling a villain, but more durable. The cold didn't vanish, but we were warmer for each other. By now, revenge had a different shape. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about ensuring no one else had to be a stepping stone. The villain label, once a noose, became a badge of responsibility. I kept the jokes dark, ridiculous, human. At council meetings, I'd roll my eyes and quip about shareholders in the afterlife, and people would laugh. Laughter is a currency, too. Giant found purpose in teaching other young men who'd been tempted by shortcuts. He taught them seamanship on dry land, how to mend a tarp, how to tie a knot that holds, how promises are made and kept with work. The adopted son who almost killed us became a man who helped raise a generation that never been offered a throne. Years later, the city remembered the winter as a chapter, not an era. Children played in patched boots, trading stories about the villain CEO who loved soup and had a habit of stealing someone's last cookie and then paying it back with interest. May married a mechanic with a soft laugh. Giant ran a logistics school. Mrs. Lee's buns were famous beyond the frozen quarter. Leela's repair shop sold 3-day guarantees. Hana and I walked the market, hands tucked in pockets, and argued about whether to adopt a dog. We did. Its name was Spoiler. I never forgot the novelty of spoilers. They saved us. Knowing the manuscript of the future gave me leverage, but it also gave me a choice: to be the villain the story needed or the man my family deserved. I chose both. I kept my cunning and used it to build rather than raise. The apocalypse had been cold. The revenge I dreamed of was hotter, slower, and more satisfying. It wasn't about a body count. It was about changing the story so that children wouldn't read about a family being taken and say, "Of course." They'd say, "Never again." We ate soup in the bunker on the first thaw, and the spoon clinked like a small bell. May winked. Giant laughed, a clean sound, no longer laced with old promises, and Hana kissed me, a quick, warm punctuation. Our story ended not with a dramatic last page, but with the start of the spring season.